Lightsabers, robots, ancient advanced civilizations lost under the sea, and a big creepy Spider-Man? Well, this arc really had everything, and now that we're finally off to Elbaf, it's really time for an Iron Giant size review of the Egghead Island arc. How did the reality of this arc compare to all of the crazy expectations that we've all built up around Dr. Vegapunk for so many years? What amazing character arcs did Oda write this time? How did he develop one of the coolest settings in many years and reveal many giant lore bombshells about the One Piece world? What are the main themes behind the story here? And most importantly, what were the all-time hypest moments in the entire Egghead Island arc? Let's take a step back here. As Wano came to a close, many fans were expecting Egghead to be a bridging arc of sorts, a short detour that introduced the final saga before then finally heading to Elbaf after years and years of build-up. And well, we sure got an arc which set the stage for everything to come, but not remotely how we thought it was gonna happen. Egghead Island really feels completely different than Wano did. Not just in terms of the aesthetic either, though, going from the very traditional Japanese style of Wano to high-tech retro futurism one island over does kind of give you whiplash. But hey, that's One Piece for you, I guess. But surface level differences are just the tip of the iceberg here. Let's look at a few of the major differences between these two massive arcs. The Straw Hats were the invading force on Wano during the raid on Onigashima, while on Egghead, they're the ones escaping a buster call. When Luffy was hungry after landing on Wano, Tama gave him all of her rice, a really special treat she only ever got once a year, and he learned her entire country was starving. In comparison, the very first time that he's hungry on Egghead, Atlas just takes him to an automatic food machine created by the island's much more benevolent ruler, Dr. Vegapunk, where anyone can eat as much and whatever they like. Both islands are located deep within the New World, though Egghead, with its really modern research facility, has a very different culture than Wano, an independent kingdom dating back to the Void Century, if not many years further. Having traveled with Kinemon and Momonosuke for so long, we know that the people of Wano have a really strong sense of national identity and pride. The Red Scabbards and their allies are all fighting to restore their ideal of Wano, and so many of the characters that we meet are willing to die in service of that very ideal. But in contrast, Egghead once again goes in the exact opposite direction here, with Vegapunk as an individual, a kind of individual I guess, being the one who defines the culture of the entire island with his own ideas and dreams instead. The narrator kindly told us at the beginning that the Egghead Island incident would change the entire world. So I suppose that if you had to really sum it up, then you could say that Wano has history, but Egghead Island makes history. But of course, appearances can be deceiving as well. The more we see and learn, the more things aren't really what they seem, and Dr. Vegapunk himself is the best example of all of them. I mean, come on, who else spent years expecting for him to be the stereotypical old man scientist, only to find out that, yeah, he is that, but he's also 6 other people of varying ages and genders as well. We're expecting him to be loyal to the world government right up until he drops the bomb that he's been secretly continuing Ohara's research into the Void Century, and now that the Gorosei know about that, they're gonna come and murder him about that. Just as we were getting used to the idea that Vegapunk is actually 7 people in a trench coat, they suddenly start being picked off one by one, and whoops, turns out it's Vegapunk York here herself who is actually responsible. Now, the entire idea of Egghead Island, which FYI to all of the non-Japanese speakers of you is actually called Miraijima in the original, meaning future island, is that its technology is said to be 500 years ahead of the rest of the world, but surprise, this turns out to be as much of a misdirection as everything else when Vegapunk himself reveals that everything that he's been developing here isn't quite as futuristic or cutting edge as everybody has thought. The smartest man in the world, and he admits that most of his latest and greatest inventions are just him desperately trying to recreate some of the lost technology of a much distant past. And in the end, I think that's really what links this new arc with the previous one and makes it such a very fitting follow-up to Wano itself. Because for all of the many ways that they seem so fundamentally different, when you really look past the surface, the defining feature of Egghead and Wano is that in their own way, they're both trapped in time. And one of the most amazing things about this arc is that it's full of some of the hypest moments in the entire series, but more on that in just a second. For now, how about all of the fantastic characters that fill this arc, which we of course need to talk about first. And let me tell you, the Egghead arc surely was ambitious, and as far as character writing goes, this arc is absolutely amazing. I mean, sure, Oda-sensei is one of the best in the business when it comes to creating incredible characters and populating an entire world with them in a way which feels organic and fun, but I will say that a major weakness of other epic post-timeskip arcs like Dressrosa and Wano have been the vast array of genuinely interesting and likable characters who sadly just don't get enough time to shine and actually live up to their potential. In contrast, with the much smaller cast of supporting characters in Egghead Island, we actually get the chance to know them so much better, and the much more minimal use of new characters really frees up time to spend with the returning ones, and boy, let me tell you, there were a lot. Whether it's the metaphorical army of Vegapunks running around, the much more literal army of various vice admirals all getting their chance to square up, the return of ZP0, or even the absolute knockout that's all things Bonney and Kuma, Egghead's characters and their character arcs just really did not miss whatsoever. And this of course extends beyond just the island of Egghead itself too, because Vegapunk's broadcast gives us incredible cameos of characters from all the way back during the East Blue, all the way to the New World. Welcome back Gin and Don Creek out of all people in this arc. We of course also have Sword kicking the beehive on Hachinosu, quick detours to the Heart and Kid Pirates getting both of their butts kicked really badly, then of course Sabo's recount of the Reverie. I mean, this arc has everything and is kind of all over the place in a good way. Honestly, really one of the only groups that we don't see that much character development with are the Straw Hats themselves. I will be the first one to admit that Frankie especially turned out to be a little bit of a letdown here, because he was so excited to finally meet Dr. Vegapunk, but all the hype that readers had about Egghead Island being his arc really ended up being a repeat of everyone thinking that Wano would be Zoro's arc. It just didn't happen, but don't worry Usopp, we're still rooting for you in Elbaf, little buddy. I believe that that will be your year. Now, Zoro himself got a speedrun of the greatest hits of his previous fights, including S-Hawk, you know, a Seraphim clone of Mihawk with Daz Bones Devil Fruit. That was definitely not on my bingo card before the arc. Then a rematch with Kaku of CP0, and his hilariously late realization that the Seraphim were made using Lunarian DNA from King as well, his main opponent from Wano. Meanwhile, the other wing of the Pirate King, Sanji, shows that he still can't be underestimated either. First, he gets so furious at S-Shark for hurting Nami that his eyebrows reverses as he taps into his German modifications, but then he White Knights for Bonney so hard that he somehow blocks a light speed attack from Kizaru just with the power of love, it seems. Luffy, of course, has his highly anticipated 1v1 matchup with Lucci and Kizaru. And sure, all the new info being dropped about Joy Boy and the potential origin of his Nika powers are all great and all, but let's be real. That info means way more to literally everyone else than it does to him himself. Luffy really doesn't seem to care too much and would much rather just keep punching government officials. And so when you boil it down, really, the only other crewmate who got some personal focus and development in Egghead is Nico Robin. Now, she might have spent a lot of the escape mysteriously injured instead of getting in on the action, but thanks to Dr. Vegapunk inheriting the will of Ohara from Professor Clover, or Professor D. Clover, sorry for that, and the fact that Jaguar D. Saul also survived the Buster Call, Robin's emotional stakes in current events are higher than they have been ever since the pre-time skip, if we're being honest. I mean, come on. That panel here of Robin's face after she learns that Saul is still alive has gotta be one of the most heartwarming things in the entire series, am I right? And I can't be the only one counting down for the Robin-Saul reunion either, no? But in comparison, none of the others have that much personally invested in current events, so they're mostly just playing support in the background. But even though it was absolutely a big missed opportunity to not give Jinbei the chance to properly react to the existence of S-Shark, a clone of himself, you could argue that that this lack of personal stakes for the majority of the crew is actually surprisingly not really a bad thing. And to flip it on its head might even have been kind of the point. I mean, the Straw Hats and apparently everyone else are closing in on Laugh Tale, and Robin was always going to be one of the all-time most important pieces on the board for finding the actual last island and the One Piece. Whether it's Luffy going head-to-head with the rulers of the world, or the cowardly trio not hesitating to put themselves between Robin and Saint Saturn, seeing the crew keep the promise that they all made to her back on Enies Lobby to fight the world for her is just really touching to see in action here. But even before the crew and their new allies are on the receiving end of the Big Buster call from literal hell, it turns out, it's pretty obvious that, much like Egghead Island, one of the single biggest influences on the entire arc is of course Dr. Vegapunk himself. The man with the plan. It's important to remember that OG Vegapunk was already a certified genius even before he ate the brain fruit, because getting the ability to perfectly remember a potentially infinite amount of information, all for the low cost of a head that won't stop growing, when you really think about it, that doesn't actually make him smarter. If anything, it's more like getting to use your textbook or Google while taking an exam, only that in this case Vegapunk also just happens to be the one writing the textbook and maybe the exam questions as well. Thanks, what a busy guy. No wonder he ended up making more copies of himself just to get some more work done. We basically learn in this arc that he began his path as a scientist because he wanted to make the climate of his home island more hospitable so the people would have an easier life there. You might remember from Frankie's time during the time skip where he was on that island that it's a really cold and harsh place. And over the course of his really long and illustrious career, he was the director of the rogue research team called MATS, and before relocating to Egghead Island, was head of the marine research facility on Punk Hazard until Caesar Clown did a big oopsie. Responsible for a host of scientific discoveries ranging from his work with Sea Stone, the creation of artificial devil fruits, the co-discovery of the lineage factor, and countless other things, he is without any doubt the by far smartest man in the One Piece world. Now, even though he was first mentioned by Kobe nearly 700 chapters ago back in chapter 433, it's really through Frankie that we start getting a really good idea of the sheer scale of just how much he has influenced the entire world. It's not only his work for the world government or the trail of resentful scientists that he's left in his wake like a pack of bitter exes either, though for the record, the fact that Judge and Caesar Clown ganged up to form Neomats in the 1078 cover story just to spite him is objectively hilarious. Through the reactions that we see from the citizens of the world, we get to witness firsthand just how beloved he truly is, how much his inventions have genuinely helped so many people in this world. It says a lot about the Gorosei's priorities that a man who's contributed as much as he has to the government, to the Marines' own military strength, and the quality of life for people all across the world can still be seen as an acceptable sacrifice in their war to maintain absolute control over the world. But hey, turns out there is not just one Vegapunk. What about all the rest of the satellites hanging around as well? Now, many people say that a person contains multitudes, and there are really few characters where that's more true than for Dr. Vegapunk. With the reoccurring themes of personhood and what makes a person truly human throughout this arc, it's really fitting how the satellites might have started out as pieces of his personality given independence, but by the time that we meet them all, they're all distinct, unique people in their very own rights. Punk number 2, Lilith, is our first introduction to the Vegapunks, and boy, what an introduction that was. Between robotic sea beasts, the Vega Force 1, and attempted robbery, the only reason she didn't escalate right there was thanks to Punk number 1 Shaka listening in as well. Pretty appropriate, I think, that the embodiment of his good was making sure that his evil wasn't getting into too much trouble either, huh? And keep in mind too that by this point, the Gorosei had already decided to assassinate Dr. Vegapunk and had their forces moving toward Egghead Island. island. Shaka very much knew that the Straw Hats had quite literally built their whole pirate career on picking losing fights and winning them anyway, so no wonder that he decided to convince them to do it on commission this time and help the Stella escape. On the other hand, most of the other satellites of Vegapunk don't get quite as much emphasis or screen time. There's Punk number 3 Edison, who represents thinking, Punk number 4 Pythagoras representing wisdom, and Punk number 5 Atlas, who represents violence. Now, they all definitely had their moments throughout this arc, but are certainly way less important than the two main Vegapunk survivors, Lilith and Punk number 6 York. Now, York is pretty laid back, which made the eventual reveal that she was actually the traitor all the more shocking. Her life actually seems not too bad considering that she's meant to embody his greed, but like she says in chapter 1091, she's a Vegapunk as well. I mean, think about it. One of the smartest people on the entire planet, and they have her on full-time poop duty? No wonder that she got angry. It's kind of weird that the Stella didn't predict that maybe making one of the satellites take care of all of those boring, time-consuming things wouldn't backfire on him eventually. I mean, she's a part of him as well, right? There's no way that she'd be satisfied with a life full of nothing but distractions any more than he would have been. Especially so if she represents his inner greed. I mean, sure, that's definitely not enough to justify all the murder and whatnot, but it's really not too unexpected either that she had a chip on her shoulder as well. But while Vegapunk and the satellites were the highlight when it came to new characters this arc, we also learned a ton about characters that have been in the series forever by this point. Do you ever look at a character and think to yourself, dang, this guy can fit that much trauma inside of him? Because by now you have to know all about Kuma. His flashback really took no prisoners when it came to inflicting maximum emotional damage on the readers, which is pretty ironic considering nearly his entire life he's been treated like a prisoner by others. Honestly, Kuma might just set the world record for most tragic backstory ever, which is a real accomplishment just compared to all of the other crazy One Piece characters. And Kuma's flashback also gave us huge amounts of massive lore about God Valley, how he acquired his pawpaw fruit, and how he came to join the Revolutionary Army as well. But through it all, he's had faith in Nika and has kept hope as a loving husband and father who would sacrifice anything and everything for Bonnie's sake. And now that we know that Kuma is also part of a really special race called the Buccaneers, there's still yet another layer of new mystery to his character still to unravel. Honestly, that bit at the end of his flashback where he's just running snapshots of all these ages and points in his life, and in all of them he's just running and running and running. Damn, that stuff hits really hard. Kuma was always way too gentle for the world that he's in, but that kindness was always his choice and his way of fighting back against the darkness of this world. He basically spent his entire life wanting to be a light for others like Nika was for him, but that selflessness is as misguided as it is admirable as well. I mean, the world is a result of desires, remember. And the fact that he so rarely acted on his very own desires shows that no matter how much he looks up to Nika, he's still missing some of the points. Because selflessness taken too far just leads to martyrdom. And there's no freedom until everyone is free, and Kuma never seems to realize that that means him as well. But what about Kuma's adoptive daughter, Bonnie? I mean, nearly every major arc in One Piece has a princess. Someone who functions as the emotional heart for the entire plot, and in the case of Egghead, that is absolutely, without question, Jewelry Bonnie. Both metaphorically and quite literally if you want to count how Kuma was technically the king of the Sorbet Kingdom for a hot minute there as well. Bonnie was adopted by Kuma as a baby after her mom Ginny had died. At this point, he quit the Revolutionary Army to raise her in this little church in the poor half of the Sorbet Kingdom, and they were very, very happy until she began showing symptoms of Sapphire Scale, the very same incurable illness which also had killed Ginny. And this kind of kickstarted a decent chunk of the current plotline, since it sent Kuma all over the world to find a cure for her, and in the end, she was cured by Dr. Vegapunk, all for the very low cost of Kuma giving up his lineage factor, his freedom, and even his body and free will itself to the world government. Kuma of course didn't want her to feel responsible for this and kept the truth from her, and because Alpha, her nurse slash assassin from CP8, threw out all the letters that he sent her, when she's 10 years old, she sets out to sea as a pirate in order to find him again and get the answers to why he left her behind. In hindsight, it's actually really impressive that she became one of the worst generation along with Luffy and co, even if a lot of that is because of her devil fruit, the age fruit. Now this stupidly overpowered devil fruit lets her change the age of herself and others to be older or younger, which is a great way to incapacitate your enemies as well as disguise yourself or others. With some practice, she's even able to embody any distorted future that she can imagine, which, as we've seen with her going full Nika mode along with Luffy to punch Saturn into literal pieces, is a completely beyond broken ability. In other words, there has been a lot going on with her character under the surface ever since we were first introduced to her 16 years ago in chapter 498, but the fact that we only found out that she was a kid this entire time was actually quite shocking for some readers, including myself. And outside her role as the princess, you could say that she's also there to embody how children in an unjust world are forced to grow up way too fast just in order to survive. Now, keeping the demographic of weekly Shonen Jump readers in mind, you could also argue that she represents the powerful potential that every single child has, all the possible futures that they could reach if they're just given the right opportunity and the freedom to properly envision what that great future could be for them. As Garb likes to say, the youth are the future. Why else would Saturn be trying so hard to make her give up on her hope if it wasn't a threat to the status quo that the world government relies on in order to maintain their power? And so when Luffy inspires her to push through those very fears, she's finally able to believe in a future in which she is just as free as he is, and that faith in herself is why this 12-year-old girl can stand side by side with the literal sun god that she has always looked up to, so that together they can punch the cruel man who tried so hard to ruin her life right in his dumb big face. And of course, these major characters were amazing, but plenty of great supporting characters also really got their moments to shine throughout this arc. Originally an enemy when we first met him on Sabaody, Sentomaru turns traitor because of his strong loyalty to Vegapunk, even if the old man kind of puts him on the spot when asking for his help. A captain of the Navy headquarters science team, he's been Vegapunk's personal bodyguard ever since he was a kid. The short but really intense flashback that we see of their first meeting shows exactly what kind of person he is. Hot-blooded, but absolutely straightforward and sincere as well, and his relationship with Kizaru really humanizes the Admiral a lot more than literally anything else in the story has done so far as well. But while Kizaru here absolutely gets crazy amounts of characterization and humanization, exactly how human the Seraphim actually are still kind of remains in question. You see, the existence of the Seraphim itself feels like a cautionary tale in progress for why making genetically engineered child super soldiers is probably never a great idea, no matter how good your intentions might have been at the very beginning, especially when you're employed by megalomaniacal tyrants. Also, am I the only one wondering that if a clone with a statistically significant amount of DNA, lineage factor from a second donor makes them more than just an extra spicy kind of clone? Like, that's straight up how you make a whole entire child, just with extra steps, right? 2 people, 2 DNA. Anyways, I feel like it could be on an episode of one of those daytime talk shows like, congratulations, King, you are the father. But don't worry though, so are 7 assorted ex-warlords as well. And what about our old secret agent friends in ZP0? Cypher Pole Aegis Zero are the best of the best elite intelligence agents and assassins who answer directly to the Celestial Dragons, even if they do always seem to somehow get trounced by the Straw Hats. Rob Lucci and his adorable better half Hattori has always been loyal to his superiors, but this arc really shows what it looks like when that loyalty is truly tested. Namely by Saint Margus Mars refusing to give any crap about one of the tiny handful of things that you're actually emotionally attached to, in this case his coworker slash best friend Kaku. So the steadfast Lucci here may be awakened in more than just one way now that he could be opening his eyes to how little regard the government actually has for some of its most loyal and dangerous followers. Kaku himself, on the other hand, is as always characterized by his disillusionment with his role, not hating it exactly, but not having any real attachment to it either beyond habit, practicality, and, well, the friends that he made along the way. I mean, even all the way back during Water 7, he's always been much more loyal to those that he's close to than the world government itself, and seeing his desire to regain his humanity but not really being sure how to, mirrored in Stussy during chapter 1116, was a really heartfelt moment for me as well. And speaking of her, as a double slash even triple agent associated with ZP0, the Underworld, and Vegapunk, Stussy is the very definition of a triple threat. Originally a clone of the former Rocks pirate and Mads member Miss Buckingham Stussy, she's unsure of who she really is and her reason for being alive to begin with, though I'm going to guess all the spying and undercover work hasn't really helped with that self-finding either. Now, the irony in her being so insecure with her own humanity when she's easily one of the most human out of everyone that we've seen in Cypher Pole would be funny if it wasn't actually really tragic, but her determination and kindness despite all of it is definitely touching, I think. But while I'm talking about the world government side of things, I really, of course, cannot ignore Admiral Kizaru. And if Jewelry Bonnie can be seen as a stand-in of all the young readers of One Piece, then Admiral Kizaru is really the perfect stand-in for any readers who also happen to fit the idea of stereotypical Japanese salarymen who really feel subservient and captured by their company and are just so tired. You see, Kizaru really is a man torn between duty and sentiment, outwardly calm and collected to the point of coming across as apathetic or even dismissive, but just like the ocean depths of the One Piece world, the more we learn, the more it's clear that there is a lot more happening under the surface than we ever thought. It's precisely because he knows full well that he's a cog in the machine that the few people that he truly cares about mean so much to him, and how seeing his resignation and quiet sadness and breaking when facing them on the opposite side of the battlefield hits really hard, him and also us as the audience. Up until now, the admirals were these, dare I say, godly existence, but now we've really met the true gods of the One Piece world face to face, and it's both fascinating and also kind of sad to see a man so powerful and so strong feel so powerless and weak. Much like Kaku and maybe even Lucci to a point, it's like he's been growing disillusioned with the world government itself as it becomes increasingly unclear whether he's staying loyal because of his own unclear justice or because to change his ways after all this time would make everything that he's done up until now seem absolutely meaningless. But while we once saw Kizaru as a threatening and powerful villain, he's really nothing compared to the real antagonists of this arc. Because at long last, after that big reveal all the way back in chapter 233, the 5 elder planets have made their move. Saint J. Garcia Saturn actually left Marijua in order to take Dr. Vegapunk out himself. Now, these mysterious 5 old men who control the world government have always been a massive presence in the background of the entire story. But never did I suspect that in Egghead Island, out of all places, we'd finally get the reveal of all of their names, as well as seeing their beastly demonic transformations in full action as well. Now, the Gorosei member with by far the most time on the page was Saint J. Garcia Saturn, who was ultimately responsible for Ginny's death and also the loss of Kuma's free will. And all of that made for one of the most satisfying punches in the entire series, which says something, when Kuma finally gave him what he deserved. survived. But then things also really got real one quick satanic ritual later, when he was then joined by Saint Marcus Mars, Saint Topman Mercury, Saint Ethan Baron Venus Juro, and Saint Shepherd Jew Peter. Because those five turned Egghead Island upside down, slaughtering the Pacifista and turning the final part of the arc in an intense escape sequence. With the five elders' very mysterious regenerative abilities and their strange yokai demon-like transformations, which curiously were not revealed officially to be devil fruits or zone fruits, but could be something completely different, they're shaping up to be absolutely terrifying endgame opponents. And you can be sure that what we saw them do here on Egghead Island is really gonna be only a small sample of their true power. After all, instead of having a lot of time to fight against Luffy and Zoro while the Straw Hats escaped, the Gorosei got to go up against the Iron Giant, and by far the biggest Egghead Island character to discuss is the Iron Giant Emeth, who was once a literal ally to Joy Boy during the Void Century. And when Luffy activated his Gear 5th transformation, the sleeping robot finally rose after 100 years of slumber. Now, since Vegapunk had actually hit his transponder snail within Emmet at the beginning of the story when we meet him, the finale of the arc saw the five elders desperately trying to destroy this ancient enemy before the conclusion of Vegapunk's massive message to the entire world. Thanks to Emmet, we finally received our first lines of official dialogue from Joy Boy himself during a flashback. And to finally beat back the five elders, Emmet used a rope that Joy Boy imbued with an insane amount of his own Conqueror's Haki that knocked out even Vice Admiral level characters and sent most of the five elders straight back to Merijoa. This is with the notable exception of Saint Saturn, who very likely remained physically on Egghead Island because he actually traveled there with his body instead of being magically summoned to the island from the castle. And I mean, come on, this gotta be one of the hypest moments in the entire arc, but I do have a feeling that there are even more hype moments to talk about later on, don't worry. But for now, since I'm talking about the Egghead arc, let's talk a little bit more about Egghead Island before we move to other places around the world. You see, even before the Straw Hats ever arrived on the island, the five elders had already signed the kill order on Dr. Vegapunk. The opening moves of the Egghead incident were already in motion long before the Straw Hats ever got involved. And considering how important this event is turning out to be for the world, it's really incredible to think about how Luffy only ended up here instead of Kid or Law, because they literally drew straws when leaving Wano. But luckily for Dr. Vegapunk, the Straw Hats landed on the island just in time. And upon arriving, the crew got their first hints at its marvelous technological wonders. Luffy and the gang, who, as is tradition, were separated at the beginning and made landfall first, quickly noticed that despite the island being surrounded by a winter climate, it was actually a tropical paradise. Meaning that, that's right, this island is climate controlled, it's one big air conditioner. Really makes you wonder why Vegapunk still hasn't installed some heaters on his frigid homeland of Karakuri Island, but maybe he just does not care anymore. Anyways, meanwhile, the rest of the crew and the Thousand Sunny come face to face with the mechanical Sea Kings and a giant robot. Very soon they get fashionable futuristic makeovers, except for Sanji, who gets possibly his least drippy outfit in the entire series so far. The opening chapters of this new arc keep pretty much showing off more and more crazy technology. Holograms, lasers, a Godzilla, and a giant NES controller for some reason as well as a literal lightsaber. Now, once CP0 shows up to spoil the entire party, the real genius of the Egghead setting really starts to kick in. You see, Egghead Island consists of several different layers, all of which serve as an important purpose for Vegapunk's research. First, the Fabrio phase, which is the factory level where workers and researchers actually create new technology. Above that, we have the Labo phase, an egg-shaped structure which rests on an artificial island cloud. This is actually where Dr. Vegapunk's main laboratory is located and where he keeps some of his most top secret inventions, like the Seraphine. And in the upper portions above that rests Punk Record, aka Vegapunk's absolutely massive galaxy brain, which is remotely connected to all of the scientists' bodies. Now, where Oda's genius really shines here though is with the inclusion of the Frontier Dome. This laser deflector shield is meant to keep enemies out and protect the inner of the laboratory. But when the traitor locks the satellites, the Straw Hats and CP0 inside of it, along with the Seraphim who've now been ordered to hunt them down, the real excitement of the arc actually gets started as the search for the real traitor begins. But of course, Egghead Island isn't the only setting that gets expanded on in this arc, as Dr. Vegapunk's broadcast to the world reveals the terrible truth about the entire globe and its dark history. It turns out that the world government's use, or at least someone's use, of the ancient weapons powered by the Mother Flame is causing the sea levels of the entire world to rise. In fact, during the Void Century, the sea level was originally 200 meters lower than currently, meaning that beneath One Piece's oceans are the ruins of entire civilizations and countries and continents that have by now been submerged by Emu and the Five Elders, or whatever war took place at the end of the Void Century. And as it turns out, the war between the world government and the pirates is still far from over, and these revelations perfectly set up the climactic final saga of the entire series, of course. A massive war is coming to the One Piece world, and we've known that now for a very long time, but there is a real storm brewing now, and even Oda-sensei himself said in an interview that the war in the final saga is gonna make Marineford seem like it was child's play. And when Vegapunk told us during the broadcast that the war during the Void Century technically never officially ended, it just made a lot of sense because, yeah, in hindsight, this has always been a world experiencing constant conflict because of past events which were never fully resolved. Now, you might have actually heard by now that Oda-sensei had planned out from the very start of writing One Piece how the story was actually gonna end. So now that we're technically at the beginning of the end after spending the last 27 years building up to that, it's just so exciting. Like, I cannot wait to see what happens in these upcoming arcs. And I mean, can you believe that that's not even all? Because not only did we get this super cool futuristic setting, not only did we get these earth-shattering reveals about the One Piece world, Oda also gave us some absolutely crazy detours to some other important locations. On Winter Island, we saw Law and his crew turn into total losers after being decimated by Blackbeard and some of his crew members. We also got a sneak peek of Elbaf when Kid got absolutely wrecked and potentially killed by Shanks shortly before Dory and Broggy made a field trip over to Egghead Island itself to help rescue Luffy and co. Then we actually got to see God Valley in Kuma's flashback, as well as seeing Sabo's perspective of the events of the Reverie. Oda then treated us to the surprising reveal of how Vivi and Wapol ended up with Big News Morgans out of all people, and we got hints of future enemies to come with the reveal of the God Knights and their leader, Figureland Garling, who is almost certainly Shanks' dad, or at least a really close relative. And as we all know, Oda absolutely loves his parallels. All the events in present-day One Piece can be sorted neatly into pre-time skip and post-time skip, with the Paramount War, of course, being the point which divides both of them into two. Now, there's a ton of parallels between major events on either side of that cut, like with Alabasta and Dressrosa, and Egghead Island is no exception here. With the biggest battle yet coming later in the final saga, it really shouldn't surprise anyone that its first arc has ended up having a ton in common with the first arc of the Summit War saga as well, Sabaody Archipelago. Now, what's actually interesting is that Egghead Island isn't a repeat of Sabaody so much as it is a do-over, an opportunity for the Straw Hats to pass the test that they originally failed the first time around. You see, back then they actually weren't strong enough to enter the new world. They didn't understand the true strength of their enemies or how high the stakes truly were gonna be, but now, forget needing Whiskey Grandpa Rayleigh to step in so that Kizaru doesn't send them on a special delivery to Davy Jones's locker without even breaking a sweat. I mean, sure, it was kind of a given that Luffy would hold his own against an Admiral now that he's a Yonko, but I don't think any of us were really prepared for just how insane the Gear 5th Luffy versus Kizaru showdown would actually be. Like, even Sanji was able to block his lightspeed attack while making witty banter as well. Once again, the Straw Hats are outnumbered and trying to escape from an island while the Marines descended on them in overwhelming numbers, but this time around, they're actually holding their own really well against the largest buster call that we've ever seen and literal creatures from literal nightmares. Plenty of returning characters from Sabaody like Kuma, Sentomaru, Kizaru, and Bonney are here as well, though the sides that some of them take might not be what even they would have expected. Looking at you, Sentomaru. Their eventual escape from the island thanks to the timely intervention of unlikely allies, in Sabaody it was Kuma, and this time it was a surprise visit from the giants, is yet another thing that both of these arcs have in common. Even the major villains of both arcs are celestial dragons, selfish monsters who sadistically prosecute the innocent and send the full might of the Navy after the Straw Hats and their allies for daring to fight them. Luffy punching St. Charlos for how he treated Hachan and Kami was one of the most satisfying moments in the entire pre-time skip, but Kuma and later Luffy and Bonney punching Saint Saturn in the face after seeing just how much he has tried to ruin their lives was just chef's kiss times 10. And so you might be thinking, if these two arcs have so many parallels, what might that mean for what comes next? What kind of predictions could we actually make about the rest of the final saga just based on the structure of the Summit War saga itself? Well, if we follow that very same pattern, now that we're leaving Egghead, our next stop, Elbaf, should be pretty similar to Amazon Lily, right? I mean, odds seem good that Luffy will once again impress the ruler of an isolated island of powerful warriors, likely after having to prove his own strength or convince them of his conviction or good intentions. And he might even unlock a new level of haki that will allow him to deal with the 5 Elder Stars, just like how he demonstrated his haki on Amazon Lily. Just thinking back to that haki blast that we saw from Joy Boy. Maybe he'll even convince them to help him go somewhere or do something important which will thoroughly ruin the world government's day. And wouldn't that be a lot of fun for everyone? After that, next up was Impel Down. So maybe their new Elbaf allies will help them break into and or out of somewhere very hard to get into. I mean, since Impel Down originally had Luffy journey deep down into hell, it would be cool if this time around he went up to heaven. So perhaps it will be his turn to invade Marijoa now that his big bro Sabo and the revolutionaries have gotten the ball rolling. Or of course, we also have the connection between Elbaf and the Sky Islands, and more specifically Burka and Enel, so that might be that same thing. And of course, after Impel Down came Marineford, which, you know, will be dialed up to over 9,000 for the final battle. I mean, sure, we know from the double page at the end of chapter 1121 who the contenders for finding the One Piece now are, but this isn't just about becoming Pirate King or stopping someone else from doing it. This is about deciding the fate of the entire world at this point. All 12 of those characters, including one new mystery character, have all kinds of fleets and factions standing behind them, just waiting to take the stage. And if Whitebeard, a single Yonko, calling on all his allies to help him save Ace was impressive, then the lineup for this final war is just going to be absolutely beyond ridiculous. Even more ridiculous than the insanely hype moments I'm gonna be breaking down in just a second. Oh my god, I have really been teasing those, haven't I? Okay, so what does this story say though? What are the main themes of the Egghead arc? Because theme is a question and a story is what happens when the protagonist and the antagonist disagree about that answer. If you think about it, everything happening right now in the present One Piece world is due to the unresolved argument between Im-sama, who is forgotten and not dead, and Joy Boy, who is dead and not forgotten. Not completely, at least. And first up, we have the themes of time and memory. Now, our experiences and our memories really define us. And boy, there was a lot to be said about memory in this very arc. I mean, Dr. Vegapunk erased his own memories in order for his own plan to succeed. Kuma's memories were removed by the pawpaw fruit, and Bonney finally discovering them was a massive step in her journey. But this arc actually goes way deeper than the memory of just the characters. It talks about the memories of the entire One Piece world. Just as brainwashing and gaslighting are the attempts to override a person's identity, so is censorship the attempt to override a society's identity. And with Egghead Island revealing more and more about the Void Century than ever before, we finally have a way better picture of how the world government actually managed to rewrite history. Egghead Island really seemed crazy futuristic compared to the rest of the world that we've seen so far, right up until the moment that we find out that the world must have been way more technologically advanced, since most of it's come about in an effort to recreate lost technology from the ancient kingdom. And this means that the Void Century wasn't just a blank period in history, it was a literal dark age which drastically regressed the baseline of all of society's technological and scientific advancements back to the Stone Age. And even worse, Emu seems to have done this very much on purpose as far as we can tell. The world government really needed to hide what happened for whatever reason, so they erased all of it from history, but Joy Boy's faction needed information to be preserved for the future since there was no other way for people to look back in order to find it, so they made the poneglyphs since they were the only thing which could survive whatever method could have been used in order to try and erase that knowledge. Thanks to Vegapunk's broadcast, we now know that the One Piece planet, as it is right now, is the result of the sea levels rising by 200 meters, drowning entire continents and civilizations now lost to history. But as we saw on Ohara, when the scholars knew that they were gonna die, they threw the books containing 5,000 years of accumulated knowledge and history into the lake in order to try and preserve it from the fire, a really heroic act which is the only reason that knowledge survived until the present day, so that Vegapunk could reveal it to the rest of the world. And this, I think, also mirrors somewhat the poneglyphs being scattered all around the world, their truths just waiting to still be discovered by the rest of the planet. But now for the next big theme, I'm gonna talk about revenge and betrayal. Now, betrayal is a reoccurring character motivation in this very arc, and with so many characters belonging to so many opposing factions, it does make a lot of sense that loyalties would get really messy. And it really isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, and we got to see a lot of different reasons why someone would betray another person or group throughout this arc. Whether it's York betraying Vegapunk because she feels undervalued and resentful, Stussy betraying ZP0 because of her loyalty to Vegapunk, or even Vegapunk himself betraying the world government because he feels he has a moral obligation to do the right thing to the world, it's never a choice made for no reason. Looking at you, Acolyte, I mean, Disney has really messed up Star Wars. Anyways, revenge, on the other hand, is something that we see a few times on Egghead as well, but unlike betrayal, it's pretty much always shown to be the wrong call. Bonney tries to avenge Kuma based on incomplete information and ends up lashing out at someone who doesn't deserve it, hurting both of them in the process. The persecution of the Buccaneers by the world government for some kind of sin in the distant past isn't just politically motivated. You can tell from how Saturn never tries all that hard to simply kill Kuma, but instead goes out of his way to punish him with a viciousness that can only be described as personal on some deep level, whether it's for something that he experienced firsthand or not, is really troublesome to see as well. And in a story like One Piece, which puts so much value on freedom and moving forward towards a brighter future together, it does make sense that those who choose to pursue vengeance instead of justice are shown as being misguided, like Bonney, or the cause for so many of the world's real problems, like the Gorosei. They don't want to resolve or move past the negativity, they just wallow in it, and that's been poisoning the entire world ever since the Void Century. I mean, these guys seem straight up inhuman, and we're not even talking about their demon forms right here. And speaking of that, what exactly does it mean to be human to begin with? I mean, the presence of other races such as fishmen, giants, and Lunarians, as well as different types of humans like long-armed or long-legged tribes, might make that question a little bit more complicated, but only really on the surface. There are plenty of characters connected to this question that we get to know over this arc. Saint Mjolsgard is a celestial dragon who's just as god-awful as any other, living his whole life being told he's a superior being to others, but by meeting Queen Otohime, he was actually able to learn and change for the better. And so when he's killed at the end of the reverie by Saint Figgle and Garling for protecting Otohime's daughter Shirahoshi, he proves that no matter how you were born, it's never too late to change for the better and die as a human being. Stussy is yet another great character who really embodies this theme to her core. Before this, we knew her as an underworld emperor and a ruthless agent of ZP0, but now we learn she was also the first ever successful human clone, or those created by Mads at least, which kind of opened its own Pandora box about who in the world could be a clone as well. But anyways, when the masks fall away and they reveal someone who is caring, loyal, and deeply unsure of her place in the world, when the Stella reassured her that she's human no matter how she came into this world, it kind of reminded me of when Tom told Frankie that no matter what his ships were used for, since he was their creator, he had to love them. And you really feel that love later on when Edison reassures her, telling her that the bonds that she has with other people are what really prove that she's as human as anyone else and that she needs to find a way to keep on living. And it is so moving. And this message feels especially meaningful, I think, coming from Vegapunk as well, since he's yet another character who's really been pushing the boundaries of how to define what a human really is. It isn't just that he apparently decided to split himself into 7 distinct people, looking at you, Voldemort, all with their own personalities and potential identity issues, though that does certainly help. I mean, even Saint Mars, a man suspected of either being immortal himself or at least having one for a boss, questions what life or death could even mean to someone like Vegapunk while staring up at the giant tank full of his severed heads in Punk Records. Like, the question here is the real Vegapunk the Stella body or the brain, or are all of them individually just some new kind of real person? Then the Seraphim also seem to fall into that very uncanny valley somewhere between obedient murder puppets and able to get awkward around their crush. And really, on some days, don't we all? Now, it doesn't matter if the obedience is programmed in or if their crush was inherited through the lineage factor. After all, the fact that their control chips exist at all means that there is a will that can be controlled in the first place, right? And then, of course, Kuma is yet another character whose humanity falls into this gray area according to some traditional definitions of it. I mean, even being turned into a cyborg and having his personality wiped, something intended to be punishment from Saturn for the crime of being born, I guess, was instead turned into an act of love which he chose freely and with no regrets whatsoever. So I like to think that if this arc wants to tell us anything, it's that love is the force which eclipses all else. So big thanks to Sanji for really just coming out and telling us one of the themes of the arc straight away. But of course, I can't talk about the big themes of this arc without talking about one of the biggest themes of the story overall: freedom. The world that the Celestial Dragons created at the end of the Void Century is one defined by its inequality, by their treatment of everyone who isn't a Celestial Dragon as lesser than them, making them the perfect antagonists for a story all about freedom. This is exactly why Luffy is such a huge threat to the entire world government, not because he's good at making friends who would literally fight the world for him as much as he would for them, or neither because he can punch really hard. He's a threat for what he represents. Luffy isn't the symbol of freedom because he ate a devil fruit with the warrior of liberation inside of it. In fact, the fruit itself seems to have chosen him specifically because he was the kind of person who would have fought for freedom anyways, whether or not he would have eaten it. And of course, Vegapunk and his inventions also represent freedom. I mean, he wants abundance and happiness for the entire planet, and he thought that he could have the freedom to do his research through the resources of the world government. However, he was just being used as a pawn in the end. The Mother Flame was meant to recreate an infinite energy source which could be used to create resources for all of the entire world. Just like his invention GP Flower consumes gunpowder by turning it into beautiful flowers. And the fact that the embodiment of his own greed ended up stealing it so it could be used to fuel a weapon of mass destruction is really a perversion of his basic intentions for it to bring peace to the world. Now, you might not remember, but the first Vegapunk to die out of all of them was actually Shaka, and it feels very intentional that the piece of him which embodied his goodwill was killed by his own greed, just as his choice to join and work under the world government in return for them funding his research is what led to him compromising his morals to create awful things and make horrible choices as well. And so in light of this, does anyone else find it kind of poetic even that Vegapunk has been trying to create an artificial sun this whole time without success, only to choose to do the right thing and be saved by the actual sun god himself in his final hours? Just saying. But now for the moment that you've actually all been waiting for, the Egghead Island Hype Awards, where I'll be talking about some of the all-time greatest moments of the whole arc and potentially even the entire story. First up, there's the award for the best 1 versus 1 fight, and I have to give that one to Luffy versus Lucci, the Awakening versus Awakening rematch of the century. I mean, even if Lucci couldn't pose that much of a threat to Luffy, the hype levels were off the charts. Also, shout out to runner-up Luffy versus Kizaru. And now for the best team-up fight, the Sword members laying siege to Hachinosu was absolutely hype, as was Luffy and the Giants battling the Gorosei, but I still do have to give this award to the Heart Pirates versus Blackbeard, where we not only got to see female Law sending the entire fandom into hard chaos, but also got reveals for a ton of the Blackbeard crew's new devil fruits and saw Beppo go Sulong with the help of a Rumble Ball. Next, the award for most satisfying punch was super hard to choose, and especially thanks to the anime adaptation being straight up epic, Garp's Galaxy Impact was absolutely breathtaking, as was Luffy and Bonnie's double Nika punch against Saturn, but this award in the end just has to go to Kuma punching Saturn after the flashback. The punch that was built up for an entire lifetime. But what about the most epic moment overall? When Shanks effortlessly taking out Kid with a divine departure is definitely a main contender. However, after waiting so long to see the 5 Elder Planets in action, getting to see all of their monstrous transformations emerging from these crazy summoning circles at once was just absolutely insane. We got to see a ton of new devil fruits from the Blackbeard crew, the Gorosei transformations, and Lucci's awakening, but the award for best power-up has to go to Bonnie here, unlocking a Nika transformation out of basically nowhere. She has been looking up to Nika with faith and hope for her entire life, even though that life is pretty short, it turns out, and getting to tap into that very same power herself thanks to Luffy's encouragement to punch out a celestial dragon. Awesome stuff and crazy implications for the rest of the story. And as you know, One Piece is a story just completely stuffed to the brim with tragic backstories, and there's just no competition in this arc. Kuma's entire life has gotta take the award for the saddest moment in this arc, but I will say that Kizaru absolutely breaking about having to kill his best friend is a really close contender there as well. As for the award for the funniest moment in the arc, that has to go to, okay, this one is actually really hard to pick. There is Jimbei saying, "My stomach has always been like this," when Atlas comments on how stuffed they all look. There's Zoro telling Karibu to GTFO, but my personal favorite, Zoro not realizing the obvious Lunarian elements of the Seraphim until way too late during his fight with S-Hawk. For the best Gear 5 moment, I've already talked about Bonnie gaining access to a Nika form, so let's stick with Luffy here. There's his creating goggles out of nothing. There's his epic home run swing. Or really, I think the clear winner here is reaching into the lab and picking up Kizaru like a freaking action figure. I will say, as tempting as it is to give the best girl award to Law here, I'm gonna have to give it to Bonnie's mother and the love of Kuma's life, Ginny. But also shout out to Lilith, York, Stussy, and so many more, a lot of babes in this arc as well. And the award for best boy goes to the series' eternal best boy, no, not Cho-Cho, Kobe. Man, has this kid come a long way, huh? Seeing him honored by Garp as the future of the Marines and having him be able to pull off wild attacks like the Honesty Impact is just very rewarding to see, even if he basically declared war on Luffy in the end there. Then the award for the most oh no moment is pretty hotly contested as well, I think. Now, as much as I want to give it to the fact that Katarina Devon can now turn into a Gorosei member, I think it's even worse that now Karibu is about to give Blackbeard the secret behind not one, but 2 of the ancient weapons who also happen to be Luffy's friends. This category actually only had 1 entry, so Shaka just wins by default. Oh, and I'm really tempted to give this one to What Happened to Robin to take her out of commission for most of the arc, but just barely scraping by with the win here is Who Fed Luffy all of that food? Long story short, the lore piece crowd was absolutely eating with this arc as well. We found out that Clover is actually AD, we found out that the God Knights exist, we found out that Gin and Don Creek are still alive and on Hachinosu, but nope, obviously this award goes to the reveal that the One Piece world is sinking into the ocean. And now for the award that you've all been waiting for, who is the real MVP of Egghead Islands? Shout out to Dory and Broggy for coming to save the day. The daddy-daughter duo of Kuma and Bonney put in a lot of work as well, and obviously the arc itself could not have happened without Vegapunk to begin with, but I still have got to give this award to Stussy. Yeah, I mean, she took Lucci and Kaku out of commission, and she saved the day by staying behind to operate the Frontier Dome, making the Straw Hats' escape possible to begin with. And thanks to Edison sacrificing himself, hopefully we get to see more of this triple agent really soon. But what we will definitely be seeing really soon is Elbaf. I mean, I've waited a whole 10+ years for this arc now. We all have. Even the Straw Hats have, with Usopp being especially stoked to head to the Island of Giants next. And so, what exactly is gonna happen on Elbaf? Well, you can check out all my predictions about what has to happen on Elbaf in this next video. Thanks so much to all of our Patreon supporters, and also we have uploaded the first bonus content on this video. There will be a little 10-second clip of that playing right now.
One Piece is ending in like 5 years.
And in 5 years, it's probably going to be another 5 years if we're being realistic. I gotta come clean, I've actually never seen Dragon Ball.
Yeah.